The prairie was quiet that morning, too quiet for spring. The kind of silence that sits heavy, like the land's holding its breath. Eli Carter stepped out of his cabin with coffee in one hand and a day's work in his eyes. He'd built his whole life around this stretch of dry dirt. 40 acres of dust, cattle bones, and promises he could barely keep. The windmill creaked above the well, its metal groan rolling through the stillness like an old man sighing. Normally that sound meant water, but today something in it felt wrong. He paused, squinting into the morning light. The breeze carried the faint cry of rope straining under weight. It wasn't the usual rattle of a loose line or bucket. It was slower, heavier. Eli's cup slipped from his fingers and shattered against the porch. He ran, boots sinking in the damp earth, heart slamming against his ribs. The sight hit him before his mind could catch it. A woman hanging from the old windmill, her pale dress turning in the wind like a broken prayer. Clara, he breathed. Her bare feet swayed inches above the dirt. Her hair, long and tangled, brushed the worn post. A small paper flapped between her fingers. The corner caught under the twine that bit her neck. Eli's knees hit the ground as he reached up, trembling hands fumbling with the rope. It burned his palms as it slipped loose, her body falling heavy into his arms. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Nothing. The stillness swallowed him whole. Eli pulled her close, rocking in the dust, muttering words that sounded more like begging than prayer. "You were supposed to be free by tomorrow," he said. "Just one more day." The letter dropped from her limp hand and landed beside them. The wind teased it open, revealing the words written in a soft, looping script. Freedom means nothing if it comes too late. For a long moment, Eli just stared, the words slicing deeper than any bullet could. Then the windmill creaked again, and the world went back to turning. The camera pans out slowly, the ranch stretching wide and empty, one man kneeling beside the woman he'd sworn to save, and failed. The sun had fallen low and red when the sound of hooves broke through the stillness. The day had been silent except for the windmill's lazy turn and the creak of the rope still hanging there, swaying above the dirt where Eli had cut her down. Now the hoofbeats came slow and steady, a rhythm that made the crows lift from the fence post and vanish into the orange sky. Eli Carter stepped out from the barn, wiping his palms against his trousers, though there was no blood left to clean. The figure riding toward him moved like a man with purpose, tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, wearing the kind of hat that shadowed both eyes and intentions. When the rider stopped at the fence line, Eli could see the badge glinting on his chest. "Afternoon," the man said, his voice low, slow, and shaped by miles. "Name's Briggs. Marshal Briggs. I'm looking for a rancher by the name of Eli Carter." Eli nodded once. "You found him." The marshal dismounted. His boots sank into the dry soil with a sound like splitting bones. His eyes, gray as wet ash, drifted past Eli, toward the shape lying under a torn canvas beside the barn. The wind caught the edge of the covering, lifting it just enough for a pale arm to flash in the light before settling again. Briggs stopped walking. "That her?" Eli said nothing. Name was Clara, wasn't it? Eli's throat tightened. "She worked here." For a time, the marshal studied him, the stubble on his jaw, the dirt under his nails, the twitch in his right hand. He looked like a man used to silence, but this silence felt too heavy to trust. "What happened to her?" Briggs asked finally. Eli swallowed hard. She hanged herself this morning." Briggs glanced toward the windmill, its rope now frayed and limp. "Women don't hang themselves, Carter," he said quietly. "Not unless they've already been hanged in life." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and something else, the faint rot of regret. Eli turned away, his voice rough. "She wanted to be free. I told her she could leave after harvest. Guess she couldn't wait that long." Briggs took a long breath, thumb tracing the metal edge of his badge. "You worked for a man once, Silas Boone. You know that name?" Eli froze. "I know it. Word is Boone's been selling labor again. Same mark he used back then. Heard he branded the women he hired." Eli's eyes dropped to the ground. "That was a long time ago." The marshal stepped closer. "Not long enough for her." Lightning cracked in the distance, a white vein slicing through the bruised sky. Briggs looked at the cabin. "Storm's coming. You got shelter?" Eli nodded. "Cabin'll hold. Then let's get inside," Briggs said. "Storms have a way of bringing out the truth." Inside, the cabin glowed dimly with lantern light. The wind pushed at the walls and thunder rolled over the plains like a warning. Eli poured whiskey into 2 tin cups, set one on the table. Briggs didn't drink. He just stared across the room at the man who said too little, and the silence between them grew thick enough to choke on. Finally, Briggs spoke. "You know, I've seen men hang for less, but guilt—" He looked toward the shuttered window. "Guilt can hang you without a rope." Eli didn't answer. He just stared at the cup in his hand, watching the whiskey tremble with every rumble of thunder. Outside, the windmill turned once more, the rope brushing wood, whispering like a voice caught between heaven and earth. The fire cracked low, whispering like it knew the sins sitting between those 2 men. Rain hit the roof in slow, steady waves, and every few minutes, thunder rolled across the plains like distant gunfire. The cabin smelled of wet wood, whiskey, and regret. Marshal Briggs sat near the table, his hat pulled low, one hand on the bottle. Eli Carter leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on nothing. The kind of stare a man gets when he's looking somewhere far behind him, into the parts he doesn't talk about. For a long while, neither spoke. The storm did the talking. Finally, Briggs poured 2 cups and slid one across the table. "Start talking, Carter," he said quietly. "About her." About what really happened. Eli didn't move. His jaw flexed once, like a man biting back something bitter. He picked up the cup, but didn't drink. "She came here near 3 years ago," Eli said at last, voice low. "Walked into the yard barefoot, clothes torn, dirt all over her. Didn't say where she came from. Didn't have to. The mark on her wrist said plenty." Briggs looked up sharply. "The brand?" Eli nodded. "Boone's mark. The same as you've seen before, I reckon. She was one of his. Said her name was Clara. Said she'd run for 2 days before she found the creek that led to my land." He let out a slow breath, the words dragging like stones. "I should have taken her to the sheriff. Should have sent her on. But I didn't." Briggs said nothing. "Just watched the man unravel himself piece by piece. I told her she could stay a while," Eli continued. "Said I'd give her food, work, safety. Thought maybe I was doing the right thing. But when I told her the law said I couldn't just free her without paying Boone's claim, she went quiet. Didn't talk to me for a week. Worked sunrise to dark, fixing fences, tending horses, cleaning the barn. Hardest worker I ever saw." He took a drink finally. Swallowed hard. "One night," he said, staring at the fire. She looked up from mending a saddle and said, "You think you saved me, but you just changed the size of my cage." The room went silent. Outside, the rain hammered harder. Briggs stared at Eli, the kind of look that makes a man squirm without moving. Eli kept going. He had to. "I told her once the harvest came in, I'd buy her freedom. Make it right. I even drew up papers, but every time she asked, I found a reason to wait. The crops, the bank, the season. Always something." Briggs leaned forward. "And what were you waiting for, Carter? The right time or the right excuse?" Eli's voice cracked. "I was waiting for her not to leave." The words hung there, heavy as the smell of rain and smoke. Briggs stood up, slow. He walked to the window, looking out at the black sky. "You kept her long enough to break her spirit," he said. "That's not freedom, Carter. That's fear." Eli's face twisted, shame and anger all tangled together. "You don't know what it's like out here," he said. "To be alone that long. To finally have someone—" The marshal turned back, eyes hard as iron. "I know what it's like to be alone. And I know what it's like to lie to yourself about why." Lightning flashed, painting both men in ghost-white light. Eli dropped his head. "I meant to let her go," he whispered. Briggs holstered his gun, the sound sharp in the quiet. "You already did," he said. "You just didn't do it while she was still breathing." The fire popped, throwing sparks like tiny stars. Neither man spoke after that. Outside, the storm raged harder, beating on the cabin like it wanted to wash the land clean. But inside, the air stayed heavy. Some storms don't end when the rain stops. Morning broke gray and hollow over the Carter ranch. The storm had passed, but it left behind a silence so heavy it felt like judgment. The wet ground glimmered under the pale sun, and the smell of ash and rain clung to the air. Marshal Briggs stood by the fence, hands buried deep in his coat, watching Eli Carter dig a shallow grave beside the willow tree. Clara's body was wrapped in linen. No coffin, just earth and guilt waiting to cover her. The marshal knelt beside her still form, noticing something beneath the cloth. A faint scar, burned and healed over, just above her wrist. He brushed the dirt away and the mark became clearer, a circle split by a line, like a coin cut in two. It wasn't just a scar. It was a brand. What the hell is that? Briggs muttered. Eli didn't answer. He just kept digging. You know what it is, don't you? The marshal pressed. Eli's shovel hit rock. He froze. His eyes flicked toward the barn, toward the post that stood near the door. There, barely visible through the rain stains, the same symbol was carved into the wood. A half-coin. Marshal Briggs rose slowly, brushing his coat aside to rest a hand on his revolver. That mark belongs to Silas Boone, he said. The banker. The one who buys debts, sells souls, and calls it business. Eli's jaw tightened. I worked for him once, he admitted quietly. Before the war. Before her. Briggs's voice turned sharp. Then you know what this means. Boone's riders will come. They don't leave loose ends. And you, Carter, you're one big goddamn loose end. Eli leaned on his shovel, mud streaking his hands and face. His eyes looked dead, the kind that stopped fearing consequence. Let them come, he said softly. Maybe they'll take what's left of me. The marshal stepped closer, his tone hardening. Don't talk like that. You owe her more than a grave. You owe her truth. Boone marked her like cattle, but you kept her here. You said you'd free her, didn't you? Eli said nothing. The wind carried the faint creak of the barn door, swaying like an old gallows. The marshal's voice lowered, almost a growl. Then it's time you make it right, Carter. Because when Boone's men ride in, there won't be time for prayer. Lightning flickered far to the west, a storm reborn on the horizon. The banker's mark caught the morning light, burned into both wood and flesh, proof that even in peace, the past comes collecting. The storm was crawling in from the west, thick and black as old gunpowder smoke. Eli could smell it before he saw it, that dry crackle of heat in the air that always came before rain and judgment. The land around his ranch lay flat and waiting, like it knew something was coming that no man could stop. Inside the cabin, Eli and Marshal Briggs worked in silence. Each nail that went into the window frame echoed like a gunshot. The boards creaked, sealing out the storm and the world beyond it. The marshal spoke little, but his eyes kept drifting to the shovel near the door and to the white sheet outside, flapping where Clara's body waited. We'll bury her before dark, Briggs said finally. Eli just nodded, hammer still in his hand. You want to say anything over her? Ain't no prayer strong enough for what I did, Eli muttered. They took her to the tree, the same one she used to rest under during long summer days, where she'd hum old songs while patching his fence. The rain had started by then, gentle and cold. Eli dug deep, hands blistering, breath ragged. The marshal held the lantern steady beside him. When the hole was ready, Eli laid her down. No coffin, no cross, just the rope and her letter on her chest. The parchment fluttered against her dress, its ink blurred by the first drops of rain. He whispered, barely loud enough for Briggs to hear, You'll never be chained again, Clara. Not by me. Not by no man. He covered her with earth, one handful at a time, until the sound of soil against cloth became too heavy to bear. Behind them, lightning split the sky open like a wound. Briggs turned toward the barn and drew Boone's brand symbol on a wooden post with black tar, a crude mark, the same one they'd found on her wrist. If his men are coming, he said, they'll see this and know they're expected. Eli wiped the mud from his hands, looked out toward the horizon and said, Then let 'em come. The rain'll wash the blood, same as the guilt. Thunder cracked hard enough to shake the windows. The two men went back inside, each loading a rifle and checking the doors. The marshal poured them a final shot of whiskey and said, One for her. One for the truth. Eli didn't drink his. He just stared at the fire, watching it dance against the boarded windows. Two men, One guilty, one righteous, waiting for the past to ride through the rain. The storm rolled in like judgment. Black clouds pressed low over the Carter ranch, swallowing the horizon. The thunder was constant now, not a rumble but a growl. Rain came hard, drumming against the tin roof, soaking the earth until it turned to blood-colored mud. Inside the cabin, Eli Carter stood by the window with a rifle in hand, the barrel trembling just enough to betray the weight of what was coming. Marshal Briggs sat across from him, reloading his revolver with slow, deliberate care. The lantern between them cast a thin orange light that flickered every time lightning cracked outside. "They'll come from the East Ridge," Briggs said. "That's where I'd ride in from. You sure you don't want to run?" Eli didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the window, the fields beyond blurred with rain. "Ain't nowhere left to run," he said finally. "The land remembers, Marshal." "Always does." Briggs gave a slow nod, his weathered hand resting on the butt of his gun. "Then we stand." Outside, the wind howled through the broken fences. Somewhere in the distance, a single horse whinnied, sharp, panicked, cut short. Then came the sound they'd both been waiting for. Hoofbeats. 4 of them, echoing through the storm like the ticking of a death clock. Eli took a deep breath and blew out the lantern. The cabin fell into shadow. Lightning flashed through the window, illuminating the muddy yard and the figures riding out of the dark. They came slow at first, shapes of men carved against the rain. Then closer, black hats, soaked coats, faces covered in bandanas. At their head was Silas Boone, tall, lean, and smiling through a mouth full of gold teeth. He rode a black stallion that didn't seem to fear thunder. Boone raised his hand, signaling his men to stop. "Carter!" His voice carried easily through the storm. "You've got something of mine, her silence." "I can't have that spreading." Eli stepped into the doorway, shotgun leveled. Rain hit his face in cold sheets, plastering his hair to his forehead. "You sold her like she was cattle," he shouted back. "You killed her long before that rope did." Boone's laugh came sharp and cruel. "You think you're a hero now? You kept her same as I did, just called it love instead of labor." Lightning tore across the sky, painting their faces white. Boone's eyes gleamed, wild and empty. "But don't worry," he said softly. "I'll send you to her." His hand dropped. Gunfire exploded. The first shot tore through the night, followed by 5 more. Bullets shattered the cabin windows, splintered the doorframe. Eli ducked low behind a table as wood chips sprayed into his face. The marshal rolled out the side window, landing in the mud, firing twice, both shots hitting true. One of Boone's riders went down hard, dragged screaming by his own horse. 2 left. Briggs yelled. The next moment, fire bloomed from the barn. One of the riders had thrown a lantern inside. The flames climbed fast, orange against the black rain. Horses screamed from their stalls. Eli cursed under his breath, grabbed a shell and reloaded. "Boone wants the land burned," Briggs shouted over the storm. "Don't let him have it." Eli kicked the back door open and ran toward the blaze. The heat hit him like a wall. Sparks flew up into the rain, turning to steam before they touched the ground. Through the smoke, Boone's last 2 men fired wildly, their bullets cutting streaks through the dark. Eli dropped one with a clean shot to the chest. The other fled into the storm. Then Boone stepped out from behind the burning barn, revolver in hand. His coat was drenched, his teeth glinting in the firelight. "You think this washes you clean, Carter?" he said, voice low, venom thick. "You're as guilty as me. Only difference is I admit it." Eli raised his shotgun, but Boone fired first. The bullet ripped through Eli's shoulder, spinning him backward into the mud. He hit the ground hard, gasping, blood mixing with the rain. The shotgun slid out of reach. Boone approached slowly, boots squelching in the muck. "You could have sold her back to me," he said. "Could have walked away rich." "She wasn't for sale," Eli rasped, clutching his wound. Boone crouched down beside him, pressing the gun barrel to Eli's forehead. "Everything's for sale out here." Eli's eyes flicked toward Clara's grave a few feet away, the small wooden cross half buried in mud. For a moment, everything went silent. No rain, no thunder. Just the sound of Boone's breathing. Then, a shot. Boone staggered backward, clutching his side. The marshal had fired from behind the burning barn, smoke rising from his revolver. "You talk too damn much, Boone," Briggs said, stepping into view. But Boone wasn't finished. Snarling, he swung his gun toward the marshal and fired twice. One bullet grazed Briggs' arm. The other went wild. Eli lunged, tackling Boone into the mud beside the grave. They rolled, fists and fury, the revolver skidding between them. "Boone's hand found it first. You'll die for her, huh?" Boone spat, teeth bloody. "She ain't worth—" Eli grabbed his wrist, forcing the gun downward. The two men struggled, faces inches apart, rain pouring between them. Then, boom! The gun went off. Both men went still. For a long moment, nothing moved but the rain. It hissed against the fire, smothering it into smoke. The flames sank, the barn collapsing inward with a groan. Marshal Briggs limped forward, the revolver still warm in his hand. He found them side by side in the mud, Boone's gold teeth shining faintly even in death. Eli's eyes were open, staring up at the dark sky. His hand rested on the grave's wooden cross. Briggs stood there for a long while, hat in hand, rain sliding down his face. "Guess the land took its due," he murmured. The thunder rolled one last time across the plains, then faded into nothing but the sound of the wind. Dawn came quiet, too quiet for a land that had known thunder all night. The storm had passed, leaving behind a wet hush that clung to every broken fence, every fallen post, every burnt piece of wood that once made up the barn. Smoke curled from the ashes like something breathing its last. Marshal Briggs stood alone in the field, his coat heavy with rain, his boots sinking into the soft mud. He looked around, at the wreckage, the bodies, the graves. And it hit him how death had a way of tidying up what life refused to fix. Boone's men were gone. Boone himself was gone too, his body half buried in the ashes, one arm stretched toward the sky as if reaching for forgiveness he'd never earn. A few yards away lay Eli Carter. The rancher was still, his shirt soaked dark where the bullet had entered. His hand rested on something, a piece of folded paper, edges burned, but the words still clear enough to read. Briggs knelt beside him. He picked up the letter gently, unfolding it with fingers that trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing this man had died, trying to pay a debt that could never be cleared. The ink had run from the rain, but the words were still there. "If freedom is mercy, then mercy is truth." "I forgive you," the marshal read it once. Then again, slower. Each word felt like a bullet softened by grace. He glanced toward the tree where Clara now rested. Her grave freshly turned, her rope buried deep beneath her so no one could ever use it again. The storm had washed her marker clean, but a single yellow flower, wild and trembling, had already found its way to bloom. "Guess you got what you were after, girl," Briggs said under his breath. Freedom. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. Around him the land felt reborn. The sun crept over the horizon, turning the wet fields into rivers of gold. Steam rose from the earth. The air smelled of rain, blood, and something new, something clean. The marshal gathered what little was left. Eli's hat, his rifle, the burned deed to the ranch. He built one last fire near the graves and fed the papers into it one by one. The flames licked high for a moment, then died down to embers. When it was done, Briggs pulled his knife from his belt and carved into a small wooden board. He didn't write names, didn't write dates. He just carved one word, slow, deep, final, free. He drove it into the earth between their graves. Then, after a long silence, he walked back toward his horse. The saddle creaked. The wind picked up. The rope hanging from the tree swayed gently, whispering through the air. But this time, it carried no weight. As Briggs rode away, he didn't look back. The ranch behind him was quiet. Too quiet. But the silence no longer felt cursed. It felt like peace. The prairie wind carried his voice, low and rough, fading into the horizon. What would you have done, folks? Saved her sooner, or carried the guilt till morning? The horse's hooves splashed through the puddles as he disappeared into the rising sun. Behind him, the empty chair on the porch rocked once in the wind, then stopped, as if the ghost that sat there had finally left. The rope swung gently above the grave, brushing the morning light. And for the first time, the land looked alive again. The rain has stopped. The prairie breathes again. Smoke drifts from what's left of the barn, and a faint wind stirs the rope that once held her, now frayed, now harmless. The land looks different under the rising sun. Softer, quieter, like it's finally forgiven itself. The narrator's voice rolls low, calm as thunder far away. In the west, mercy came slow, and sometimes not at all. But the land remembers every promise broken and every rope cut too late. A pause. The wind picks up, lifting dust over 2 fresh graves marked with a single word, free. Tell me, folks, if you'd been him, would you have freed her sooner? Thunder rumbles again, fading into the golden horizon. Like, share, and subscribe. If you'd choose mercy before the noose,